I went in and observed a line to the lunchroom. This is a group of kindergartners. And the para that was there was like pointing out who it was. And I'm like, yeah, but if you hadn't pointed that out, half of the kindergartners are acting squirrely and making noise and jumping out. It's like we shouldn't be so hyper focused on our student.
Welcome to the Misfit Behaviorists podcast mini-series. This round, join your hosts Audra Jensen and Sammy Brown, here to bring you fun and functional advice for creating and implementing behavior plans. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Misfit Behaviorists podcast, part 3 of our mini-series of developing FBA BIP. And this week we are talking about conducting those initial direct observations. All right, so at this point in the FBA process, you will hopefully have your signatures and your plans and everybody's on the same page and we're going forward, because at this point you need to have that. You need to have parents on board, knowing what's going on, approving that you can go in and make these direct observations. Some districts feel like at this point, anybody that's on their case or employed by the district is able to make these observations. I can tell you that may be the case for a typical behavior team or psychologist or somebody working in the school. From the BCBA perspective, I'm only comfortable if I have those direct consultation signatures, because we kind of have that other ethical requirement through the BACB. But anyway, just make sure that you're following what your district guidelines are, but you're also looking at our ethical guidelines through the BACB before you start the process. So when you're doing observations, my thought in doing these initial observations is to be as a wallflower as possible. So my thought is to go into a situation and try to be as objective as possible, to try to look at everything with fresh eyes. A lot of times these are students that we already know, but when we're making kind of these formal observations, I always go in with a notepad, pencil, and I start just jotting down everything I'm seeing. And I'll put the time and exactly what I'm seeing. And I try to keep all of that emotional language out of it. At this point, I'm just recording what I'm seeing, what's going on. I also try to always look at a variety of settings and times and different locations, good days and bad days, when he or she is doing well and not doing well. I try to get enough of it so you kind of get this big rounded picture of the student and the different settings and the staff member interactions, peer interactions, environment interactions. And so we're just capturing that kind of comprehensive view of the student's behavior across a lot of different settings.
And it's super important to do that, because I've gone in to do an observation before and there's no behavior. And so everyone's like, well, that's not a typical moment.
But that's important.
Absolutely. And so what was different that day potentially that created this change? And then AM, in the morning observations, also in the afternoon. And I like you said, across different settings is important, just to kind of get a clearer picture of the different people and the different, demands, so to speak, that are being placed on that student.
Yeah. Early on, when I was starting to do these observations, I found that I'd have a student come up to me and say, who are you here to see? And that kind of triggered me into changing my behavior so that I learned to be a better blend in and more inconspicuous. So like when I go do an observation, I usually try to get there before any of the students get there, make sure I understand what the teacher's going to be doing so that I can blend in with the classroom as much as possible. If it's a student who is aware of what's going on, I might have the teacher, introduce me as doing something that has nothing to do with the student, kind of make them think that that's not what is, because the whole point is you don't want to affect the behavior you want to observe. You just want to be as inconspicuous as possible. So
you mentioned a lot about, taking timestamp notes that are unemotional, very just ambiguous of what you're actually seeing. If you have RBTs or someone that's in the district that's working with the behavior team, I have sent an RBT in, especially if the student knows me or, is likely to kind of come up and try to engage too much, which would, make the accuracy of the observation kind of null and void. So I have sent that person in place. But if you're teaching, that idea of timestamp and exactly what you're seeing, sometimes I've gone back even through those notes as I've kind of cleaned them up, and I've seen the antecedents and the consequences at play right because the way that I've written it out into those observation notes.
Yeah, and I'll go through my notes afterwards and I'll make like an A circle and a B circle with a defined and a C over here. And then I'll make notes after my notes and sort of start to find those patterns and triggers, because that's kind of what we're starting with. That's the very first thing that we're looking for. I also like to look for both typical and atypical behavior in the student, as well as I like to take data on the other students in the room. So like if I'm making an observation at recess in particular, this is a great way or a great time to do it, is you're making an observation as a student at recess. I'm making note of the time and the behaviors and what I'm seeing for the student I'm there for, but I'm also making notes of the peers around him were doing this, because it could be that we're in, and we see this a lot, overlooking at a behavior, like microscoping a behavior. I remember we were called in to do an observation, and I went and did the observation, and they were standing in line, and some of the behaviors they had concerns was, wiggly behaviors, just being out of line and loud talking and stuff. And so I went in and observed a line to the lunchroom. This is a group of kindergartners. And the para that was there was like pointing out who it was. And I'm like, yeah, but if you hadn't pointed that out, half of the kindergartners are acting squirrely and making noise and jumping out. It's like we shouldn't be so hyper focused on our student. Now, I would make a note of those behaviors, but I'd also note that, yeah, half the class was engaged in these same behaviors because it's probably age appropriate. Now, there were other things going on that we obviously had to be aware of, but definitely looking at typical behavior, atypical behavior, their behavior, as well as peers' behaviors as well.
Yeah, I've done a normative peer sample where I've done just a basic T chart, and I'm got the student A, that I'm there to observe, and then basically just the class on the side. But I will literally go, if it's blurting, and then just do tally marks just to see if this is a huge concern. Like you said, how much is this specific student that we're called in to observe engaging in that behavior versus just typical developing behavior for that age group or that classroom or that environment.
Right. And then afterwards, making sure you're getting those observations, like I said, across multiple days, even weeks if you need to, making sure that you feel comfortable, that you've captured enough snapshots that you can put together a full picture. It's like putting together that puzzle, and you're taking little pieces. You need to make sure you got all the pieces together before you put it together. And then also after your observations, check in with the teacher, whoever's there. Is this a typical day for them? Is this atypical? Is there another time that I would be more likely or less likely to see the behavior we're concerned about? And any other things, is there anything new that's come up since we started the process that you want me to be aware of? So checking in with whoever you're observing and making sure, I think this is kind of going back, making sure before the observation that the people you're observing, that they know that you're not here to critique what they're doing, that you're only there to make objective observation about how the student's doing, and just quell any fears that they have that we're in there jotting down notes about their teaching style or anything like that, because that's not what we're doing.
No, and an important piece that you added on that is, as this process, it can seem as a lengthy process and it's very cumulative, is making the entire team, whoever is interacting with the student during the school day, be aware that if anything changes with that student, we need documentation to know that that's happened. So,
Yes.
parents finally got him in with the pediatrician and they started a new medication, and we're already a week in and we're going, well, wait a second, now we got to backtrack to try to see that. So not only just the medication piece, but if there's been any dietary changes or anybody that's come a recent vacation. I've had that, the student just got back because the family went to Hawaii for a week and a half. And it's like, well, that's important information to know.
Yes.
Also choosing when we're doing those observations to make sure that we're not backing up against something that would already lead us into an atypical indirect observation.
Yeah, those are great points. So yeah, I guess the key is just that great observation is being discreet, being thorough, planning ahead, and just always being a lookout for those pieces of the puzzle so we can put them together.
Yep.
And next week, we are going to do step 4, which is kind of that beginning anecdotal data. So how we're going to gather the first objective-ish data, the ABC data. We're starting to really hone in on the behaviors we're concerned about, gathering that what was happening before, what did we see, and what did we after, and then what do we do with that kind of initial anecdotal data. All right, so we will catch you guys next week. Check us out on Facebook or Instagram or all the places, Apple,
YouTube.
YouTube. We'll put some freebies up there this week and every week to guide you on your process. So we will see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Misfit Behaviorists, and be sure to tune in next week for more tips and tricks. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.